He did not know why he was alive. This was the first thought. When he came up from the water, not, "Where am I?" Not, "Which way is the shore?" The first thought was why. Why was he the one whose head was above the surface? Why was he the one whose lungs were filling with air instead of sea? The water around him was full of the things that had been on ships and were no longer on ships. Wood, cloth, the things men carry when they go to war and have not yet decided that the war is lost. He did not look at the other things in the water. He looked at the shore. He swam toward it, not because he had decided to live, because his body had decided for him, the body that had trained for years to move toward what it needed, did not stop to ask whether this was right. It moved. He followed it. The Battle of Danura, the 25th day of the 3rd month, the year 1185. The Heike had the sea. They had always had the sea. The Minamoto were men of the mountains, the men of the east, the men who had fought on land, for the things that land offers. The Heike were men of the water. They knew the tides. They knew the currents. They knew the way the channel between the islands moved in the morning and moved differently in the afternoon. They had used this knowledge. For years they had used it. But on this morning, the tide turned at the wrong time, or the right time, depending on which side you were on. The Minamoto ships were moving with the current. The Heike ships were suddenly moving against it. The archers who had been shooting one direction now had the wind against them. The rowers who had been moving toward the enemy were now moving away. This is how battles end, not always with a single moment, sometimes with a shift, so small that only the sailors feel it first. A change in the current, a change in the wind, and then the understanding that moves from the sailors to the soldiers, to the commanders, and finally to everyone at the same moment. This is how it ends. He had been on one of the smaller ships, a supply vessel, not one of the great fighting ships, with the towers and the platforms from which archers fired. He was not an archer. He was not a great warrior. He was what he had always been, a man who carried things, who followed orders, who held his position, because that is what a soldier does when there is still a position to hold. He had watched the great ships. He had seen the commanders in their lacquered armor. He had seen the women who were on some of the ships, the women who had come because there was nowhere else to go, who had left the capital with the Heike when the Heike left the capital, and who had nowhere to return to. He had seen what happened to them. He would not think about this. He would look at the shore. He would swim. He would not think about what he had seen. The shore was rocks, not sand. He pulled himself onto the rocks and lay there. His armor was gone. He did not remember losing it. At some point between the ship and the water and the swimming, the armor had gone. He still had his sword. He did not know why. The armor was gone, but the sword was still at his side. The cord that attached it had held when everything else had not. He lay on the rocks. He breathed. The water moved against the rocks below him, with the sound that water makes when it has just finished doing something enormous and has returned to being simply water again. He did not move for a long time. He did not know how long. The light changed. The sun moved. He lay on the rocks and did not move and breathed. When he finally moved, he moved away from the water, up the rocks, into the trees above the rocks, into the shadow of the trees that grew on the hillside above the channel where the battle had been. He did not go toward the sound of people. He went away from it. He went into the trees and kept going until the sound of people was gone, and there was only the sound of the trees and the sound of the water below, growing smaller as he climbed. He climbed until he could not climb any more. Then he sat against a tree with his sword beside him, with the sounds of the forest and the distant water and nothing else. He was not the only one who had survived. He understood this. There were others in the water. There were others on the shore. The Minamoto had taken prisoners. The Minamoto would sort through who was useful and who was not, who could be ransomed, who had value, who could be made to tell them things. He had no value. This was the one useful thing about being nobody. Nobody would look for him. Nobody would come to the shore, asking where the nameless soldier who carried things on the supply vessel had gone. He was not worth looking for. He had survived because he was nobody. The great commanders had not survived. The great lords had not survived. The women on the ships had not survived. He had survived because nobody cared enough to make sure he didn't. He sat against the tree. He did not think about this. He looked at the sword. The sword was still wet. He dried it on his sleeve, or the sleeve that remained. He dried the sword and looked at the water on the sleeve and thought about nothing. The sword had no name. Great swords had names. The swords that had been made by famous smiths and given to great warriors and carried through great battles and passed from father to son through generations. Those swords had names. His sword had no name. It was the sword of a soldier who carried things on supply vessels. It had been made somewhere by someone and sold and acquired and was now here on a hillside above the straits of Shimonoseki, in the hand of the only person left to carry it. He looked at the sword. It did not look like a sword with a name. It looked like what it was, a tool, the tool of a man whose name was also nothing. That would be remembered. The Heike were finished. He knew this. He did not need to see more to know this. The way the ships had turned, the way the current had turned, the way the commanders had looked at each other in the moment before everything changed. He had seen that look before, on other faces, in other places, the look that says, "This is the thing we were afraid of, and it is happening, and there is nothing left to do about it happening." The Heike were finished. The world that had made him What he was finished. The world was becoming something else now, something he did not know yet, something that had no place in it. For a man who had carried things on supply vessels, for a clan that no longer existed, he sat against the tree. He dried the sword. He breathed. He did not know where he would go. He did not know what he would do. He only knew that the body that had swum to shore without asking him was still breathing, and that breathing was the only instruction he had been given. He would follow it, as he had always followed instructions, until there were no more instructions left. He breathed. The forest was quiet. The water was far below. The sword was beside him, nameless, as he was. The first day after Danura, the first day of whatever came next, Part 2, the mountain. He walked for 3 days before he stopped, not because he had decided to stop, because his legs decided for him, the same way his body had swum to shore without asking. The legs walked until they didn't, and when they didn't, he sat down, and that was where he stayed, a hollow in the hillside, where the roots of an old cedar had grown out and around a depression in the earth, a space just large enough for a man to sit with his back against the roots, and the slope of the hill behind him and the trees in front. He looked at the space. He decided it would do. He did not know what it would do for. He decided it anyway. The first days were the worst, not because of hunger. Hunger came later and was manageable. The body that had walked 3 days had other things to think about first. The first days were the worst, because of the sounds. He heard things that were not there. The sound of the battle, the sound of the water, the sound of the ships, the particular sound of a large thing going under the water. That is different from any other sound. And that does not leave the way ordinary sounds leave. He would be sitting in the hollow and hear the ships. He would look up, and there were only trees. He would sit back down. He would hear the ships again. He did not fight the sounds. He had learned somewhere in the years of being a soldier, who followed orders and carried things, that fighting what cannot be fought is a way of exhausting yourself for no purpose. He let the sounds come. He let them be there. He waited for them to pass. Sometimes they passed. Sometimes they did not. The forest fed him, not generously, not the way the supply ships had fed him, with rice and dried fish, and the ordinary provisions of men who were supposed to be somewhere specific, doing something specific. The forest fed him the way forests feed people, who know how to look: roots, berries, small things that could be caught if you were patient enough and quiet enough and had nowhere else to be. He had nowhere else to be. He learned patience. He had always been patient. Soldiers who carry things learn patience early. You wait, you carry, you wait again. The waiting is most of it. But this patience was different. This patience had no end point, no order that would come, no moment when the waiting would be over and the carrying would begin. Just the waiting, just the forest, just the small things that could be caught. if he was quiet enough. He cleaned the sword every day. This was the one thing he did, with regularity, with something like ceremony. Everything else in his days was shaped by what the forest required: when to look for food, when to sleep, when to move and when to stay still. But the sword he cleaned every day, regardless of what the forest required, regardless of whether it needed cleaning. He took it out, he wiped it down, he checked the edge, he put it back. He did not know why he did this. He had not decided to do it. It had simply begun and continued, the way some things begin and continue, without being decided. The sword was the one thing that connected what he had been to what he was now. The soldier who had been on a ship, and the man who lived in a hollow in the hillside were the same person, because the sword was the same sword. That was the only continuity he had. He maintained it. A month passed, maybe more. He did not count days. He had counted days when counting mattered, when there were orders that came on specific days, and things that had to be done before specific days, and people who would notice if the days were wrong. Now there was no one to notice. The days passed, the weather changed, the forest changed with it. He changed with the forest. He grew thinner, his hair grew longer, the calluses on his hands, that had been the calluses of a soldier, became the calluses of a different kind of work: digging, climbing, the work of staying alive in a place that required different things than the work of war. He did not think about the future. He had tried in the first days to think about the future, what he would do, where he would go, whether there was somewhere to go. The thinking had not produced anything useful, so he stopped. He thought about the day he was in, the food he needed, the sword that needed cleaning, the hollow that needed to be maintained against the rain. He thought about the battle, not often, not deliberately, but the battle was there, the way something is there, when you have been in the middle of it. It did not ask permission to appear. It appeared. He thought about the men he had known, not friends exactly. Soldiers do not always have friends, but men he had known, men he had carried things alongside, men he had eaten with, in the particular silence of men who eat together every day and have said everything that needs to be said, and sit now in a silence that is its own kind of companionship. Where were they? He did not know. Some were dead. Some were prisoners. Some were perhaps in their own hollows, in their own hillsides, cleaning their own swords and not thinking about the future. He hoped it was the last one. He did not know why. It seemed better to think of them in their hollows than in the other places. One morning he saw a deer. It came through the trees with the particular carelessness of animals that have not yet learned to be afraid of a specific place. It had not learned to be afraid of his hollow. Nobody had been in his hollow before him. There was nothing in his hollow that said, danger. The deer stopped. It looked at him. He looked at the deer. He was still enough. He had become very still. The forest had taught him stillness, the way it teaches everyone. Who stays long enough, you become still, or the forest gives you nothing. The deer looked at him for a long time. Then it decided he was not dangerous, or it decided he was not interesting, or it decided something. That deer decide. That cannot be translated into human terms. It moved on, into the trees, gone. He watched the place where it had been. For a while he watched that place. Then he looked back at the sword. He resumed cleaning. He began to talk to the sword. Not immediately, not in the first weeks, but at some point in the longer stretch of days. He began to talk. Not conversation, not the way you talk to a person, more the way you talk when you are doing something with your hands. And the talking is the sound your thoughts make when they become too heavy to stay inside. He talked about the battle. He talked about the men he had known. He talked about the hollow and what it needed. He talked about the deer. He talked about the sound of the water. That still came sometimes when he was trying to sleep. The sword did not respond. He did not expect it to. He talked anyway, because talking is sometimes the only way to know what you are thinking. He thought about his name. He had a name. He had been given a name. The way everyone is given a name, by people who knew him when he was small enough to be given things, but the name belonged to a world that was finished. The name had been used by the Heike, by the people who had given him orders, by the men he had eaten with. In the silence that was companionship, those people were gone. The name they had used had no one to use it anymore. It sat in his head, the way a tool sits when there is no more work for it, present, unnecessary. He did not use the name. He did not think of himself by it. He thought of himself as the man in the hollow, the man who cleaned the sword, the man who was still here. The sword had no name either. They were the same in this, two nameless things, in a hollow in a hillside, waiting for nothing and doing it together. Summer came to the mountain. He had arrived in spring, the spring of the battle, the spring of the water, and the swimming, and the 3 days of walking. Summer came and the forest changed. More growth, more cover, more food if you knew where to look. Warmer nights, the sounds of the mountain at night that were different from the sounds of the day, and different again from the sounds he heard. When the battle came back, he lay in the hollow in the summer nights and listened to the mountain, the insects, the wind, the occasional sound of something larger moving through the dark. He was not afraid of the dark. He had been afraid of many things. He was honest with himself about this. There had been things in his life that had frightened him. The first battle, the sound of arrows, the particular moment before something terrible, when you know it is coming and cannot do anything about the knowing, but the dark of the mountain was not frightening. The dark of the mountain was simply the dark. It did not want anything from him. It did not require anything of him. It was just there, the way the mountain was just there, the way the hollow was just there. He slept in the dark. He woke when the light came. He cleaned the sword. He looked for food. He sat in the hollow. He talked to the sword about the things that became too heavy to keep inside. This was his life. He did not call it a life. He did not call it anything. It was what was happening. He let it happen. Autumn came. With the autumn came the first cold. Not the cold of winter. The cold that tells you winter is somewhere ahead, and you should begin to think about what winter requires. He had not thought about winter. He had not thought about anything beyond the day he was in. But the cold was a thought he could not avoid. The body that had swum to shore and walked 3 days and cleaned the sword every day would not survive the winter without preparation. He began to prepare. He gathered what the forest offered in greater quantities. He improved the hollow. He made it deeper. He made it drier. He made it the kind of place where a person might survive what was coming. He did this with the same absence of feeling with which he did everything, not because he did not feel, because feeling had become something he did in small amounts, at specific times, when the battle came back, in the night sounds, when he talked to the sword. The rest of the time, he simply did what needed doing. This was what he knew. This was what he had always known. Do what needs doing. Wait. Do what needs doing again. The first snow came at night. He woke to white. The forest that had been brown and gray was white. The hollow was white at its edges, where the roof he had made did not quite reach. He lay in the hollow and looked at the white. He had seen snow before. Snow was not remarkable, but this snow was the first snow of the first winter of the life after Danura. It felt like something. He let it feel like something. Then he got up. He cleaned the sword. He looked for food. He came back to the hollow. He sat with the sword in the silence of the first snow. He talked to the sword. He said, "This is where we are. This mountain, this hollow, this snow." The sword said nothing. The snow fell. The mountain was quiet. He was still here. For whatever that was worth, he was still here. Part 3. The Monk. The monk appeared in the second winter. Not the first winter. The first winter the man had been too raw for anyone to appear. Or perhaps the mountain had understood this and kept people away. Mountains do not keep people away deliberately, but they have their own logic about who passes through them and when. The second winter. He had survived the first. He had prepared better for the second. The hollow was deeper. The roof was better. He had more food stored than he had needed, which meant he had learned what the mountain required for a person to survive it. The monk came through the trees on a morning when the snow was thin and the cold was the kind of cold that is uncomfortable but not dangerous. He was walking with a staff. He had a pack on his back. He was not young, but he was not so old that the mountain was beyond him. He moved through the trees with the particular efficiency of someone who has been walking for a very long time. and has learned not to waste any part of the movement. He saw the hollow before he saw the man. He stopped. He looked at the hollow. He looked at the evidence of the hollow, the way it had been shaped, the roof, the stored food, the signs that someone had been here for longer than a single night. He did not call out. He waited. The man in the hollow watched him. The monk waited. The man watched. After a time, the monk sat down, not in the hollow, near it, on a root. He sat on the root and put his pack down and looked at the trees and waited some more. The man watched him do this. He had not been watched in a long time. He had not watched anyone in a long time. The deer did not count. He watched the monk sit on the root and look at the trees, and he thought, this person knows how to wait. Eventually the man spoke. Not the monk, the man. He spoke first, because the monk was going to wait forever, if that was what was required, and the man found that he did not want to wait forever. He said, "Are you lost?" The monk said, "No." The man said, "Where are you going?" The monk said, "Nowhere in particular. I go where the path goes." The man considered this. It was not so different from what he himself was doing, going nowhere in particular, staying where the staying was. He said, "There is food, if you are hungry." The monk said, "I am hungry, thank you." They ate together, in the silence that is not uncomfortable, the silence of two people who do not know each other, but who are not enemies, and who are eating, which is a thing that does not require words. The monk ate carefully. He did not eat as if he were starving. He ate as if food was something to be attended to properly, given the attention it deserved. The man watched him eat. He had not watched anyone eat in a long time. He had forgotten what it looked like for someone to do something that he himself did. He had forgotten that other people ate, that other people moved through the world, doing the ordinary things when they had finished. The monk looked at the sword. He did not ask about it. He looked at it with the attention of someone who has looked at many swords in many different circumstances and knows what a sword in a particular circumstance means. The monk stayed 3 days. He did not ask to stay. He did not announce that he was staying. He simply did not leave. When the first day ended, and the man did not tell him to leave, and the second day came, and then the third. On the first day they did not talk much. On the second day they talked more. On the third day the man told the monk about Danura, not all of it, not the sounds that still came at night, not the things he had seen that he had decided not to think about, but enough, where he had been, what had happened, how he had come to be on this mountain, in this hollow, in this second winter. The monk listened. He did not say, "I am sorry." He did not say, "That must have been terrible." He listened. When the man finished talking, the monk was quiet for a time. Then he said, "The Heike are gone, but you are here. These are both true. The man said, yes. The monk said, both things being true is not a contradiction. It is simply what is. The man thought about this. He had thought about it himself, in different words, or without words, the way you think about things when you are alone on a mountain and have only a sword to talk to. On the third day the monk asked about the sword. He said, "Does it have a name?" The man said, "No." The monk said, "Does it need one?" The man thought about this. He said, "I don't know." The monk picked up the sword. He held it the way someone holds a thing. They are trying to understand, rather than use. He turned it. He looked at it. He put it down. He said, "A sword without a name is still a sword. It does what a sword does. The name is for the people who talk about the sword, not for the sword itself." The man said, "And the person without a name." The monk looked at him. He said, "Is still a person who does what a person does." The monk left on the morning of the fourth day. He packed his pack, he took his staff, he stood at the edge of the hollow, and looked at the man. He said, "There is a village 3 days east of here, down the mountain and into the valley. They grow rice. They need people who know how to do things. If you go there, they will not ask where you came from. People in villages rarely ask where someone came from. They ask what you can do." The man said nothing. The monk said, "The mountain is good for some things. It is not good for everything." Then he walked into the trees. He moved with the same efficiency he had arrived with, without looking back, the staff and the pack, and the particular walk of someone who has been walking for a very long time. The man watched him go. He watched the trees. After the monk was gone, he watched the place in the trees where the monk had been. He said to the sword, 3 days east." The sword said nothing. The mountain was quiet. The second winter continued. Part 4, The Village. He did not go immediately. He sat with the monk's words for the rest of the second winter. 3 days east, down the mountain and into the valley. They need people who know how to do things. He turned the words over, the way he turned the sword over when he cleaned it, looking at each part, understanding what each part was. He had things he knew how to do. He knew how to follow orders. He knew how to carry things. He knew how to wait. He knew how to be quiet and useful and present without requiring attention. He did not know if these were the things a village needed. He thought they might be. Villages needed people who could follow what the season required, who could carry what needed carrying, who could wait through the winter without becoming a problem. When the snow began to thin, he packed what he had. There was not much. The things the forest had provided. Over 2 winters, a few tools made from what the mountain offered. The sword. He looked at the hollow. Before he left, the roots of the cedar that had grown out and around, the depression in the earth, the roof he had made, the improvements of the second winter. It had been a good place. It had been what he needed, when he needed it. He did not feel sad about leaving. He felt the particular feeling of someone who has finished with a place and is moving to the next place, which is not sadness, which is not happiness, which is simply the feeling of one thing ending and another beginning. He walked east, 3 days east, down the mountain and into the valley. The village was small, 12 houses, a rice field, a small shrine at the edge of the field, the kind of village that has existed in this form for longer than anyone in it can remember, and will probably exist in this form for longer than anyone in it will live. He arrived at the edge of the village in the early morning, when the mist was still in the valley, and the rice field was gray with it, and the houses were beginning to produce the smoke of morning fires. A woman came out of one of the houses. She saw him at the edge of the field. She looked at him the way people look at someone who has arrived at the edge of their village in the early morning mist, without expression, assessing. He said, "I was told you might need someone who knows how to do things." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she said, "Can you plant rice?" He said, "I can learn." She said, "Come inside. There is food." He learned to plant rice. It was not difficult. It required the things he had: patience, the willingness to be in water for long periods of time, the ability to do the same thing repeatedly without becoming distracted or resentful. He was good at all of these things. The rice field was different from the mountain, but the qualities required were not so different. Attention, patience, doing what the thing required. The village people watched him at first. They watched the way people watch someone new who has arrived without explanation and stayed without explanation and seems to require nothing beyond the work and the food and the place to sleep. They did not ask where he had come from. The monk had been right about this. They asked what he could do. He showed them what he could do. After a while, they stopped watching and simply worked alongside him, which was its own kind of acceptance. The woman who had let him in was called Okiku. She ran the village in the way that certain people run things, without being given a title for it, by being the person who knew what needed doing and made sure it got done. By being the person others came to when they did not know what to do next. She did not ask his name. For the first week she called him nothing. She spoke to him directly. "Can you do this? Do that. Here." He found this comfortable. He had been called nothing. On the mountain, he had been no one's business. On the mountain, here he was no one's business either, only more usefully so. He was no one's business, but he was someone the village needed. That was a different kind of nothing. She noticed the sword. Everyone noticed the sword. In a village of rice farmers, a sword is noticed, but they did not ask about it. He kept it with him. He cleaned it every day. This was the one thing from the mountain he had brought without alteration every day: the sword, the cleaning, the brief ceremony of continuity. Okiku watched him clean it one evening. She watched with the attention she gave to everything, the particular attention of someone who sees things and thinks about what they mean. She said, "Does it have a name?" He said, "No." She said, "My husband's sword had a name." He did not ask about the husband. The husband was not present and had not been mentioned before. He waited. She said, "He went to the war. He did not come back. The sword did not come back either." He said, "Which side?" She said, "Does it matter?" He thought about this. He said, "No, I suppose it doesn't." The seasons turned: spring, summer, autumn. The rice was planted, grown, harvested. Winter, the quiet of the valley, spring again. He was not the same as the village people. He did not pretend to be. He did what the village needed. He ate what the village ate. He slept under the same roof as the others, in the way that people who work together share what they have. But he was not from here. Everyone knew this. No one said it. It was simply the quality he had that the others did not have. The quality of someone who came from somewhere else and will never quite be from here. He accepted this. He had accepted stranger things. There was a girl in the village, not a child, a young woman. She was Okiku's daughter. She had her mother's way of watching, the particular attention, the thinking about what things meant. She watched him the way her mother watched him, from a distance at first, then less distance. She began to ask him things. She asked, "What is the mountain like?" He said, "Quiet." She said, "I've never been above the valley." He said, "The mountain is very large. You understand how large it is only when you are inside it. From here it looks like a shape. From inside it is a world." She thought about this. She said, "Is it frightening?" He said, "At first. Then it is just the mountain." Her name was Sato. She asked him things the way her mother did not. Okiku asked practical things. "Can you do this? Does this need doing?" Sato asked the other questions, the questions that do not have practical answers. She asked, "Do you miss it? The mountain?" He thought about this honestly. He said, "I miss the quiet. The village is not quiet in the same way." She said, "Is that why you don't talk much?" He said, "I was quiet before the mountain. The mountain just made it more." She said, "What made you quiet before?" He thought about the supply ships, the men who carried things, the particular silence of men who have been together long enough. That silence is its own conversation. He said, "The work I used to do, it required quiet." She said, "What work?" He said, "I carried things." She waited to see if there was more. There was not more. She accepted this, the way her mother accepted things, without demanding more than what was offered. A year passed, then another. He was still not from here, but he was here. These were both true. He thought of what the monk had said. Both things being true is not a contradiction. It is simply what is. Sato brought him things sometimes, food she had made, something she had found that she thought he would find interesting. She brought him a feather once, a very large feather. She said, "I found this by the river. I thought you might want it. For something." He looked at the feather. He said, "Thank you." She said, "Do you know what bird it's from?" He said, "No." She said, "Me neither, but it's a good feather." He agreed that it was a good feather. He kept it. He did not know why, but he kept it. Okiku asked him to stay for the third winter, not directly, in the way that practical people ask indirect things. She said, "The roof on the east house needs work before the snow comes. Someone who knows what they are doing should look at it." He said, "I will look at it." She said, "It will take some time to fix properly." He said, "I have time." She said, "Good," and went back to what she was doing. He fixed the roof. It took through the autumn, then the snow came, and he was still there. With the third winter coming, and the roof fixed, and Sato bringing him things, and asking him questions he did not always answer, and Okiku running the village in her way, and the rice field white and silent under the first snow, he cleaned the sword. He said to it, "This is where we are now." The sword said nothing. The village was quiet in the way that villages are quiet in winter, not the quiet of the mountain, the quiet of people who are inside and warm and waiting for spring. He was inside, he was warm, he was waiting for spring, he was still here. Part 3. The Monk. The monk appeared in the second winter, not the first winter. The first winter the man had been too raw for anyone to appear, or perhaps the mountain had understood this and kept people away. Mountains do not keep people away deliberately, but they have their own logic about who passes through them and when. The second winter, he had survived the first. He had prepared better for the second. The hollow was deeper. The roof was better. He had more food stored than he had needed, which meant he had learned what the mountain required for a person to survive it. The monk came through the trees on a morning when the snow was thin and the cold was the kind of cold that is uncomfortable, but not dangerous. He was walking with a staff. He had a pack on his back. He was not young, but he was not so old that the mountain was beyond him. He moved through the trees with the particular efficiency of someone who has been walking for a very long time and has learned not to waste any part of the movement. He saw the hollow before he saw the man. He stopped. He looked at the hollow. He looked at the evidence of the hollow, the way it had been shaped, the roof, the stored food, the signs that someone had been here for longer than a single night. He did not call out. He waited. The man in the hollow watched him. The monk waited. The man watched. After a time, the monk sat down, not in the hollow, near it, on a root. He sat on the root and put his pack down and looked at the trees and waited some more. The man watched him do this. He had not been watched in a long time. He had not watched anyone in a long time. The deer did not count. He watched the monk sit on the root and look at the trees, and he thought, this person knows how to wait. Eventually the man spoke. Not the monk, the man. He spoke first, because the monk was going to wait forever, if that was what was required, and the man found that he did not want to wait forever. He said, "Are you lost?" The monk said, "No." The man said, "Where are you going?" The monk said, "Nowhere in particular. I go where the path goes." The man considered this. It was not so different from what he himself was doing, going nowhere in particular, staying where the staying was. He said, "There is food, if you are hungry." The monk said, "I am hungry, thank you." They ate together, in the silence that is not uncomfortable, the silence of two people who do not know each other, but who are not enemies, and who are eating, which is a thing that does not require words. The monk ate carefully. He did not eat as if he were starving. He ate as if food was something to be attended to properly, given the attention it deserved. The man watched him eat. He had not watched anyone eat in a long time. He had forgotten what it looked like for someone to do something that he himself did. He had forgotten that other people ate, that other people moved through the world, doing the ordinary things when they had finished. The monk looked at the sword. He did not ask about it. He looked at it with the attention of someone who has looked at many swords in many different circumstances and knows what a sword in a particular circumstance means. The monk stayed 3 days. He did not ask to stay. He did not announce that he was staying. He simply did not leave. When the first day ended, and the man did not tell him to leave, and the second day came, and then the third. On the first day they did not talk much. On the second day they talked more. On the third day the man told the monk about Danura, not all of it, not the sounds that still came at night, not the things he had seen that he had decided not to think about, but enough, where he had been, what had happened, how he had come to be on this mountain, in this hollow, in this second winter. The monk listened. He did not say, "I am sorry." He did not say, "That must have been terrible." He listened. When the man finished talking, the monk was quiet for a time. Then he said, "The Heike are gone, but you are here. These are both true." The man said, "Yes." The monk said, "Both things being true is not a contradiction. It is simply what is." The man thought about this. He had thought about it himself, in different words, or without words, the way you think about things when you are alone on a mountain and have only a sword to talk to. On the third day the monk asked about the sword. He said, "Does it have a name?" The man said, "No." The monk said, "Does it need one?" The man thought about this. He said, "I don't know." The monk picked up the sword. He held it the way someone holds a thing. They are trying to understand, rather than use. He turned it. He looked at it, he put it down. He said, "A sword without a name is still a sword. It does what a sword does. The name is for the people, who talk about the sword, not for the sword itself." The man said, "And the person without a name." The monk looked at him. He said, "Is still a person who does what a person does." The monk left on the morning of the 4th day. He packed his pack, he took his staff, he stood at the edge of the hollow, and looked at the man. He said, "There is a village 3 days east of here, down the mountain and into the valley. They grow rice. They need people who know how to do things. If you go there, they will not ask where you came from. People in villages rarely ask where someone came from. They ask what you can do." The man said nothing. The monk said, "The mountain is good for some things. It is not good for everything." Then he walked into the trees. He moved with the same efficiency he had arrived with, without looking back. The staff and the pack, and the particular walk of someone who has been walking for a very long time. The man watched him go. He watched the trees. After the monk was gone, he watched the place in the trees where the monk had been. He said to the sword, 3 days east." The sword said nothing. The mountain was quiet. The second winter continued. Part 6. What remained. Years passed, not dramatically, not the way years pass in stories, where each year brings something new, and the something new is always significant. They passed the way years pass in a rice village, spring and the planting, summer and the growing, autumn and the harvest, winter and the quiet, then spring again. He planted, he grew, he harvested, he waited through the winter, he fixed what needed fixing, he carried what needed carrying. He was good at all of these things. He had always been good at doing what was needed without requiring attention for it. The village had needed someone like this. He had needed a village like this. Both things being true, not a contradiction. Sato asked him once if he thought about Danura. It was an autumn evening, many years after the samurai on the horse, many years after the monk, many years into the life that had become simply life. She asked, "Do you still think about it?" He said, "Sometimes, less than before." She said, "What do you think about when you think about it?" He considered this carefully. He said, "The water, the color of the water that day, the particular color. I have not seen water that color again." She said, "What color was it?" He said, "I don't know how to say it. It was the color of something. That is happening. That should not be happening. I don't know if that is a color, but that is what it looked like." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think I understand." He said, "Do you?" She said, "Not the color, the feeling. I think I understand the feeling." Okiku died in the 7th year, in her sleep, in the winter, in the particular way. of people who have worked hard all their lives and whose bodies decide one night that the working is done. The village mourned her. He mourned her. She had been the person who had said, "Can you plant rice?" and had given him food and had let him stay without requiring him to be anything other than what he was. He did not know how to say what she had given him. He thought about it for a long time. After she was gone, she had given him a place, not a home, a place, a specific place on the earth, where he was allowed to be, where what he could do was enough, where what he was enough. He stood at her grave and thought this. He did not say it aloud. It did not need to be said aloud. She had known. People who run villages, the way she ran the village, know these things. Sato ran the village after that, in the same way her mother had, without a title, by being the person who knew what needed doing and made sure it got done. She was better at talking than her mother. She said things directly that Okiku would have said sideways. The village adjusted to this. Villages adjust. She still brought him things sometimes. Less often now. She was busy. The village required her attention. But sometimes, a thing she had found, something she thought he would find interesting, the way she had done, since she was young, and he was the strange man, who had come from the mountain and stayed. He thought about the monk sometimes, whether the monk was still walking, whether the monk had a place, the way he had a place, whether the monk wanted a place, or whether the walking was its own place. He thought, the monk knew what he was doing. The monk understood something about the difference between the mountain and the valley. The mountain is good for some things. It is not good for everything. He had needed the mountain. He had needed the hollow, and the sword and the quiet, and the long, slow work of becoming someone who could be in a place without the place demanding that he be someone specific. And then he had needed the valley, the rice and the work, and Okiku and Sato, and the ordinary life. That is not dramatic, and does not require that you have been anywhere specific or done anything specific to deserve it. He was old now, not old the way the monk had been old the way rice farmers get old, the particular aging of someone who has done physical work for many years, the hands, the back, the way of moving, that accommodates what the body has become. He still cleaned the sword every day. This had not changed. The sword was older too. There were marks on it that had not been there at Danura. Not damage, use, the marks of a tool that has been used for the things it was not made for, the digging and the building, and the occasional cutting of things that needed cutting. In a life that required the cutting of things, the sword had no name. He had no name, or he had a name that he had not used in so many years that it had become theoretical. A name he had been given, a name he did not use. Sato called him something. The village called him something. He did not think of it as a name. He thought of it as what they called him, which is different. A name is given. What they called him had accumulated over the years, from the work and the presence and the being here consistently. One spring morning, Sato found him sitting at the edge of the rice field. He was sitting in the way he sat when he was thinking about something that did not need to be thought about urgently, the thinking that was more like looking at the field, at the mountain in the distance, at the particular quality of the morning. She sat beside him. She said, "What are you looking at?" He said, "The mountain." She looked at the mountain. She said, "Do you want to go back?" He thought about this honestly. He said, "No, I just like to know it's there." She said, "It's always there." He said, "Yes, that's what I like about it." She asked him that morning about the sword. She said, "You've had it a long time. Have you ever thought about giving it a name?" He said, "Yes, I thought about it on the mountain." The monk asked about it. She said, "What did you decide?" He said, "I decided it didn't need one. The sword doesn't need a name. Names are for the people who talk about things, not for the things themselves." She said, "Do you believe that about people too?" He looked at the mountain. He said, "I used to. Now I think names are useful. They let you know you are being spoken to. They let you know someone is thinking about you specifically, not just anyone. You." She said, "And the sword." He said, "The sword knows when I pick it up. It doesn't need a name for that." He died in the autumn, many years after Denura, more years than he had expected. When he swam to shore, more years than anyone had expected. Perhaps more years than he deserved, perhaps exactly as many. As were supposed to happen, he died in the way he had lived, for many years, quietly, without requiring attention for it. Sato was there. Some of the village people were there. The sword was beside him. He had cleaned it that morning. The last morning. He had not known it was the last morning. He had cleaned it because that was what the morning required. Sato kept the sword. She did not know what to do with it at first. It was not the kind of thing a village keeps. It was not the kind of thing you hand to the next person. The way you hand tools. She kept it. She cleaned it. Not every day, but regularly. The way he had shown her, without showing her, simply by doing it, in front of her, for many years. She did not give it a name. She thought about it sometimes, about whether a name would change what it was. She decided it would not. The sword was the sword. It had been many things. The sword of a soldier who carried things, the companion of a man who lived in a hollow and talked to it when the thoughts became too heavy, the tool of a man who planted rice and fixed roofs and was present in a valley for many years. It was all of these things. A name would not add to them. A name would only reduce them to something that could be spoken. The things that could be spoken were not the things that mattered. The rice field is still there. The village is still there. 12 houses, the shrine at the edge of the field. Different people. People who never knew the man who came from the mountain. In the second year after Danura, and stayed, the mountain is still there. The hollow where the cedar roots grew out and around. The depression in the earth is still there. The cedar is larger now. The hollow is smaller. The mountain does not remember who stayed there and who passed through. Mountains do not remember. They simply are. The sword is gone. No one knows where. Sato kept it, and after Sato it went somewhere else, and then somewhere else. The way things go when the people who knew what they were and why they mattered are no longer there to say, but the sword was, the man was, the mountain was, the valley and the rice field, and Okiku and Sato, and the monk and the rider and the deer that came to the hollow in the morning and decided he was not dangerous. All of it was, for exactly as long as it was, and then it was in a different way, the way everything is after the people who were in it are no longer in it, present in the shape of things, in the cedar that grew larger, in the rice field that is still a rice field, in the mountain that is still there and always there above the valley that does not know who it once held. He swam to shore. He walked 3 days. He found a hollow. He cleaned a sword. He talked to it. When the thoughts became heavy, he walked east when the monk told him to. He planted rice. He fixed a roof. He stayed. He was here, nameless as he had always been, as the sword had always been. The Heike are finished. He is finished. The mountain is not finished. The rice field is not finished. He swam to shore because his body knew how to swim. He stayed because the village had room. He was here because here is where he ended up. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was exactly as much as there was. Part 7. The Other One. He came in the 5th year, not from the east road, from the mountain, the same mountain the man had come from, coming down the same way, through the trees, into the valley, to the edge of the rice field. The man saw him coming, before anyone else did. He recognized something in the way he moved, not the person, the quality, the particular way of moving, through unfamiliar terrain that belongs to people who have been moving through unfamiliar terrain for a long time. He put down what he was carrying. He watched the figure come out of the trees. The figure was a man, older than the man in the field, or perhaps the same age, but worn differently. The mountain had done something to him that was different from what it had done to the man who had come down 4 years earlier. He was thin. His clothes were the clothes of someone who had been wearing the same things for a very long time and had repaired them with whatever was available. He carried nothing, or almost nothing, a small pack and a sword. He stopped at the edge of the field. He looked at the village. He looked at the man. He looked at the sword at the man's side. The man looked back at him. They stood like this for a moment, two men with swords, at the edge of a rice field, recognizing something in each other that did not need to be named, to be understood. The man said, "How long?" The other man said, "Since Danura." The man said, "5 years." The other man said, "Yes." His name was something. He did not say it. The man did not ask. They were past names, both of them. Names belonged to a world. They had both left. The man brought him to Okiku. She looked at the other man, the way she had looked at the man 4 years before. The assessment, the quiet calculation. She said, "Can you plant rice?" The other man said, "I don't know. I've never tried." She said, "Then you'll learn. Come inside. There is food." The other man was different from the man. He talked more. Not much more, but more. He had things he needed to say that had been unsaid for 5 years, and the presence of someone who understood what the 5 years had been opened something. He talked to the man in the evenings, after the work, when the village was settling. He talked about the mountain, about where he had been, about what he had seen at Danura. The man listened. He did not say much. He did not need to. He had had the sword to talk to, and the sword had not talked back. The other man did not need response. He needed witness. Someone who had been there. Someone who knew what the words meant, without having the words explained. He talked about a man named Yoshitsune, not with admiration, not with hatred, with the particular quality of someone who has thought about something for a very long time and has arrived at something more complex than either. He said, "I saw him once, at Ichinotani, before the battle. He came over the cliff on a horse, the cliff that was supposed to be unpassable. He came down it, and everything changed." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I used to hate him for that. The cliff, the horse, the single decision that changed everything." The man said, "And now?" The other man said, "Now I think about the horse, what that horse must have felt. Coming down a cliff, it had no reason to believe it could come down, because a man told it to." He stopped. He said, "I'm not sure what that means. I think about it though." Sato watched the other man. She watched him the way she watched things. She was trying to understand the particular attention inherited from her mother, applied to everything that came into her field of vision. She said to the man one evening, "He's angry." The man said, "Yes." She said, "You're not." The man thought about this. He said, "I was. On the mountain. Not at anyone. Just at the situation. The way things had gone. The way things always go. When you are not the one deciding how they go." She said, "What happened to it?" He said, "The mountain happened to it. There is nothing to be angry at. On a mountain. The mountain doesn't care. You can be angry at it, and it continues being a mountain. Eventually you stop being angry, because there is nowhere for the anger to go." She said, "And then what?" He said, "And then you just are. You're in the mountain. You're alive. That's what's happening. The other man planted rice badly at first. He had been a fighter, not a carrier of things. His hands knew how to hold a sword, and how to do the things swords require. They did not know how to do what rice required. The man showed him, without words mostly, by doing the thing next to him, so he could see how the thing was done, the way things are taught, between people who do not have many words for what they are teaching. The other man learned, slowly, with the frustration of someone who has been good at things and is now bad at something, who has to be a beginner again. The man remembered this feeling from the first spring, the mud and the unfamiliarity, and Okiku standing in the field, showing him without words. He said to the other man, "It gets easier." The other man said, "How much easier?" The man said, "Enough." They talked about Danura once, really talked about it. It was a winter evening, the 6th year. The other man had been in the village for almost a year. He had gotten better at rice. He had gotten quieter, not the quiet of suppression, the quiet of someone who has said the things that needed to be said and has less to say now. The man did not know who started the conversation. It was the kind of conversation that starts itself when two people who have been around the same thing, without talking about it directly, are finally in the same place, at the same time, with nothing else to do, and the thing simply begins to be talked about. They talked about the ships. The other man had been on one of the larger ships. He described what he had seen from there. The man described what he had seen from the supply vessel. They compared the different angles, the different moments. They talked about the water, the color of the water. The man had talked about this with Sato, the color that was the color of something happening that should not be happening. The other man said, "Yes, that is what it looked like." I have not found the word for it either. They talked about the people, not by name, by description, the person who was there, the person who did this. What happened, they did not talk about. The things they had decided not to think about. They talked around those things, both knowing what was not being said, neither requiring it to be said. At the end of the conversation, the other man said, "I thought I was the only one." The man said, "So did I." The other man said, "It's better, knowing there's another one." The man said, "Yes." The other man said, "I don't know why it's better. It doesn't change anything. What happened, happened, whether there are two of us or one." The man said, "It changes the feeling of it, not what it was. The feeling of carrying it. It's lighter when someone else is carrying the same thing." The other man was quiet. Then he said, "Yes, that's right. That's exactly right. Part 7, the other one." He came in the 5th year, not from the east road, from the mountain, the same mountain the man had come from, coming down the same way, through the trees, into the valley, to the edge of the rice field. The man saw him coming before anyone else did. He recognized something in the way he moved, not the person, the quality, the particular way of moving through unfamiliar terrain that belongs to people who have been moving through unfamiliar terrain for a long time. He put down what he was carrying. He watched the figure come out of the trees. The figure was a man, older than the man in the field, or perhaps the same age, but worn differently. The mountain had done something to him that was different from what it had done to the man who had come down 4 years earlier. He was thin. His clothes were the clothes of someone who had been wearing the same things for a very long time and had repaired them with whatever was available. He carried nothing, or almost nothing, a small pack and a sword. He stopped at the edge of the field. He looked at the village. He looked at the man. He looked at the sword at the man's side. The man looked back at him. They stood like this for a moment, 2 men with swords, at the edge of a rice field, recognizing something in each other that did not need to be named, to be understood. The man said, "How long?" The other man said, "Since Danura." The man said, 5 years. The other man said, "Yes." His name was something. He did not say it. The man did not ask. They were past names, both of them. Names belonged to a world. They had both left. The man brought him to Okiku. She looked at the other man, the way she had looked at the man 4 years before. The assessment, the quiet calculation. She said, "Can you plant rice?" The other man said, "I don't know. I've never tried." She said, "Then you'll learn. Come inside. There is food." The other man was different from the man. He talked more. Not much more, but more. He had things he needed to say that had been unsaid for 5 years, and the presence of someone who understood what the 5 years had been opened something. He talked to the man in the evenings after the work, when the village was settling. He talked about the mountain, about where he had been, about what he had seen at Danura. The man listened. He did not say much. He did not need to. He had had the sword to talk to, and the sword had not talked back. The other man did not need response. He needed witness. Someone who had been there. Someone who knew what the words meant, without having the words explained. He talked about a man named Yoshitsune, not with admiration, not with hatred, with the particular quality of someone who has thought about something for a very long time and has arrived at something more complex than either. He said, "I saw him once, at Ichinotani, before the battle. He came over the cliff on a horse, the cliff that was supposed to be unpassable. He came down it, and everything changed." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I used to hate him for that. The cliff, the horse, the single decision that changed everything." The man said, "And now?" The other man said, "Now I think about the horse, what that horse must have felt. Coming down a cliff, it had no reason to believe it could come down, because a man told it to." He stopped. He said, "I'm not sure what that means. I think about it though." Sato watched the other man. She watched him the way she watched things. She was trying to understand the particular attention inherited from her mother, applied to everything that came into her field of vision. She said to the man one evening, "He's angry." The man said, "Yes." She said, "You're not." The man thought about this. He said, "I was on the mountain, not at anyone, just at the situation, the way things had gone, the way things always go, when you are not the one deciding how they go." She said, "What happened to it?" He said, "The mountain happened to it. There is nothing to be angry at. On a mountain, the mountain doesn't care. You can be angry at it, and it continues being a mountain. Eventually you stop being angry, because there is nowhere for the anger to go." She said, "And then what?" He said, "And then you just are. You're in the mountain. You're alive. That's what's happening." The other man planted rice badly at first. He had been a fighter, not a carrier of things. His hands knew how to hold a sword, and how to do the things swords require. They did not know how to do what rice required. The man showed him, without words mostly, by doing the thing next to him, so he could see how the thing was done, the way things are taught, between people who do not have many words for what they are teaching. The other man learned, slowly, with the frustration of someone who has been good at things and is now bad at something, who has to be a beginner again. The man remembered this feeling from the first spring, the mud and the unfamiliarity, and Okiku standing in the field, showing him without words. He said to the other man, "It gets easier." The other man said, "How much easier?" The man said, "Enough." They talked about Danura once, really talked about it. It was a winter evening, the 6th year. The other man had been in the village for almost a year. He had gotten better at rice. He had gotten quieter, not the quiet of suppression, the quiet of someone who has said the things that needed to be said and has less to say now. The man did not know who started the conversation. It was the kind of conversation that starts itself when two people who have been around the same thing, without talking about it directly, are finally in the same place, at the same time, with nothing else to do, and the thing simply begins to be talked about. They talked about the ships. The other man had been on one of the larger ships. He described what he had seen from there. The man described what he had seen from the supply vessel. They compared the different angles, the different moments. They talked about the water, the color of the water. The man had talked about this with Sato, the color that was the color of something happening that should not be happening. The other man said, "Yes, that is what it looked like." I have not found the word for it either. They talked about the people, not by name, by description, the person who was there, the person who did this. What happened, they did not talk about, the things they had decided not to think about. They talked around those things, both knowing what was not being said, neither requiring it to be said. At the end of the conversation, the other man said, "I thought I was the only one." The man said, "So did I." The other man said, "It's better," knowing there's another one. The man said, "Yes." The other man said, "I don't know why it's better. It doesn't change anything. What happened, happened, whether there are two of us or one." The man said, "It changes the feeling of it, not what it was. The feeling of carrying it. It's lighter. When someone else is carrying the same thing." The other man was quiet. Then he said, "Yes, that's right. That's exactly right." Part 9, the story. There was a child in the village, not Sato's child, the child of one of the other families, a boy, 7 years old perhaps, or 8, the age when children have stopped being entirely in their own world and have begun to be curious about the world other people are in. He had been watching the man for as long as he could remember, which was not very long, but to him it felt long. He had always been aware of the man, the way children are aware of things that are different from the expected. The man was different from expected. He had a sword. He was quiet in a different way. He had come from somewhere that was not here. The boy began to follow him, not secretly. Children do not follow secretly. He simply appeared wherever the man was and watched. The man noticed the boy watching. He did not tell him to leave. He had not been told to leave. When he was watching things, he needed to watch. He let the boy watch. One afternoon the boy said, "Where did you come from?" The man said, "The mountain." The boy said, "Before the mountain." The man said, "From a ship." The boy's eyes widened slightly. He said, "A big ship." The man said, "A supply vessel, not very big. It carried food and things people needed." The boy said, "Did it sink?" The man said, "Yes." The boy said, "And you swam?" The man said, "Yes." The boy thought about this. He said, "That must have been very far." The man said, "It was." The boy came back the next day. He said, "What was it like?" "The ship." The man thought about the ship. He had not thought about the ship as a specific object in a long time. The ship as a thing, what it looked like, what it smelled like, what it felt like to be on it. He said, "It was made of wood. It smelled of wood and salt and the things it carried. It moved differently than the ground moves. The ground stays still. The ship moved. Always, even when it seemed still. It was moving. The water moving it." The boy listened to this very carefully. He had never been on a ship. He had never seen the ocean. He said, "Is the ocean very big?" The man said, "Bigger than you can see. You can see a very long way from a ship on the ocean, and in every direction. There is more ocean. The mountain is big because it goes up. The ocean is big because it goes out in every direction, as far as you can see. And then more." The boy was quiet. He was imagining this. The man watched him imagine it. There was something in watching a child imagine something enormous. That was its own kind of thing. The boy asked about the sword. Of course the boy asked about the sword. Children always asked about the sword, the difference between the boy, and the adults who had asked was that the boy asked without anything behind the question. The adults had asked because they wanted to know something about who the man was. The boy asked because the sword was interesting. He said, "Can I see it?" The man looked at the boy. He took the sword out. He held it so the boy could look at it. He did not give it to him. The boy looked at it carefully, the way children look at things they find genuinely interesting, all of their attention on the one thing. He said, "Does it have a name?" The man said, "No." The boy said, "Why not?" The man said, "It never needed one. It's just a sword. It does what it does. It doesn't need a name to do it." The boy thought about this. He said, "I don't have a name like that. My name is what everyone calls me. I need it." The man said, "That's different. You're a person. People need names, so other people can find them, can call them, can think about them specifically. The sword doesn't need to be found. It doesn't need to be called. I always know where it is." The boy said, "Do you have a name?" The man said, "Everyone has a name." The boy said, "But you don't use yours." The man looked at the boy. The boy looked back, with the particular directness of children who have not yet learned that some questions are not asked. The man said, "No, I don't use mine much anymore." The boy said, "Why?" The man thought about how to say this to a child. He said, "The name belonged to a time that is finished. This time is different. I am different in this time. The old name doesn't quite fit anymore." The boy said, "Like when your clothes don't fit because you grew." The man looked at the boy. He said, "Yes, exactly like that." The boy started bringing other children. The man did not encourage this. He did not discourage it either. The children came. They watched. They asked questions. He answered what he could answer and did not answer what he could not. Sato watched this with the expression she used when something was happening that she found interesting but did not want to comment on because commenting might change it. One evening she said, "You're good with them." The man said, "I answer their questions." She said, "Most people don't. Most people tell children to go away or give them answers that aren't real answers. You give them real answers." He said, "The questions are real. They deserve real answers." She said, "Where did you learn that?" He thought about it. He said, "I don't know. I think from being on the receiving end of questions that weren't answered properly. You learn what questions feel like when no one takes them seriously." The boy asked him once about the war. He said it simply, the way children say things they have been thinking about for a while. He said, "You were in a war, weren't you?" The man said, "Yes." The boy said, "What was it like?" The man looked at the boy. He thought about how to answer this for a child. He thought about what was true that could be said, and what was true that could not be said. He said it was like something very large, happening very fast, and most of what you do is try to keep up with it. You don't have time to think. You just do the next thing, and the next thing, and then it's over. And then you think, but by then it's already happened. The boy said, "Are you glad it's over?" The man said, "Yes." The boy said, "Even though you lost?" The man said, "I wasn't the kind of person who could win or lose. I carried things. The winning and losing happened to other people. I just got wet." The boy laughed, a child's laugh, short and genuine, at the image of the man getting wet. The man found that he was almost smiling. He had not laughed in a long time. He could not remember the last time, but something in the child's laugh touched the edge of something that might become a laugh if it was given time. Part 10. The River. The other man left in the 8th year. He said he was going west. He did not say why. He had something unfinished in the west, or something he needed to see, or simply the feeling that the staying had finished and the going was beginning. The man did not try to change his mind. He understood the feeling. He had had it differently. He had stayed. The other man needed to go. Both were the same feeling expressed differently, the knowing of what you need. The morning he left, they stood at the edge of the village, the other man with his pack, his sword, the efficiency of someone who has learned again how to carry only what he needs. The man said, "Be careful." The other man said, "You too." Then he walked up the east road and turned west at the junction and was gone. The man watched him go. He thought, "We are probably the last ones, or close to the last ones, the ones who swam and walked and stayed quiet, going in different directions now, as the years move us apart, the way they move everything apart." Sato was different in the 8th year. She was older, everyone was older. But the change in Sato was not the change of getting older. It was something else. She was more serious. Running the village was serious work, but it had always been serious, and she had always been capable. This was different, a weight she was carrying. That had not been there before. The man watched her the way she watched things, without comment, waiting. She told him in the autumn. They were at the river. The river ran at the edge of the valley. She came there sometimes in the evenings. He had begun to come too, without it being arranged, simply ending up at the same place, at the same time, in the way that happens between people who have been in the same place for a long time. She said, "I think about leaving sometimes." He said nothing. He waited. She said, "I think about what it would be like to not be the person who runs things here, to go somewhere, to be nobody's responsibility. For a while." He said, "Where would you go?" She said, "I don't know. That's part of the appeal, not knowing." He said, "Not knowing where you're going is harder than it sounds." She said, "I know, you did it." He said, "I didn't choose it. It chose me. Choosing it might be different." She said, "Better or worse?" He thought about this. He said, "I don't know. Maybe better. You would know from the beginning that the not knowing was on purpose. That would change how it felt, not knowing where you are going, because you chose not to know, is different from not knowing, because everything you knew sank to the bottom of the ocean. She said, "Do you ever wish you had chosen, instead of it being chosen for you?" He thought about this for a long time. The river moved past them. The autumn evening, he said, "I used to, in the first year, when the things that happened at Danura were still close. I thought, if I had chosen to leave the Heike, if I had made a choice, then at least it would have been mine." She said, "And now?" He said, "Now I think it doesn't matter how you arrive at the place you're in. What matters is what you do. Once you're there, I didn't choose to swim to shore, but I chose everything after, more or less." She said, "You chose to stay." He said, "Yes, every year I chose to stay. That's a lot of choices, accumulated over time." She said, "I won't leave." She said it the way she said things. That were decisions, not asking, not uncertain, a decision that had been made. He said, "I know." She said, "How did you know?" He said, "Because you're like your mother. Your mother stayed too, even when the war took her husband, even when things were hard. She stayed. You're the same. You think about leaving, but you stay." She was quiet. She looked at the river. She said, "She never told me she thought about leaving." He said, "She didn't tell me either. But I think she did. Everyone does. The ones who stay are the ones who think about leaving, and stay anyway. Leaving is easy. Staying when you could leave is the thing." They sat by the river until it was dark, not talking, the kind of not talking that is its own conversation. The river, the night sounds, the particular dark of an autumn evening in a valley between mountains. Eventually Sato said, "I should go in." He said, "Yes." She stood. She looked at the river one more time. She said, "I'm glad you came down from the mountain." He said, "The monk told me to." She said, "I know. I'm glad he was there to tell you." She went in. He stayed by the river a little longer, the water moving past, always moving, never the same water twice. He said to the sword, "The river keeps moving, even when everything else stays still. Even when you stay still, the river moves." The sword said nothing. The river moved. The night was quiet. He went inside. Part 11. The spring again. The boy grew. This was not surprising. Boys grow, but watching it happen, in the particular way it happened, was something the man found himself attending to. The boy who had asked about the ship was taller now. His voice was changing. His questions were changing. They were still genuine, still the questions of someone who wanted to know, rather than someone who wanted to seem like they knew. But they were more complex now. The questions of someone who has been thinking before they ask. He asked the man one morning, "Did you have a family before?" The man said, "Everyone has a family before." The boy said, "But yours, Specifically, the man thought about this. He said, I had people, the way soldiers have people, the people they came from, the people they fought alongside. I didn't have a family the way you mean. A wife, children. I was young when I started carrying things. I didn't stop long enough. The boy said, Do you wish you had? The man looked at the morning field, the spring planting, the mist still in the valley. He said, I have this, whatever this is. It's not nothing. The boy said, Satosin says you're part of the village now. The man said, Does she? The boy said, She says some people are from a place, and some people become of a place. She says you became of here. The man thought about this. Of here. Not from here, but of here. He said, That sounds right. The boy asked to hold the sword. He had asked before, when he was younger. The man had shown it to him, but not let him hold it. Now the boy was older. He asked again, with the seriousness of someone who understands that a sword is not a toy, who has been thinking about this for a while. The man looked at him. He said, Do you know what it is? The boy said, It's a sword. It's for fighting, but you don't fight with it. You carry it, like it's something you keep. The man said, Yes, that's right. He gave it to the boy, carefully, showing him how to hold it, the handle, the weight, how to respect the blade. The boy held it. He felt the weight. He turned it carefully. He said, It's heavier than I thought. The man said, It always is. The boy held it a moment longer. Then he gave it back. He said, Thank you. The man put it back. He said, It was my companion for a long time. On the mountain. I talked to it. The boy said, Did it answer? The man said, No, but it listened. And sometimes listening is what you need. The boy said, I can listen if you need to talk. The man looked at the boy who had grown from the small watcher to this person who offered to listen. He said, Thank you, I know you can. Spring came to the valley every year. The man had stopped counting the springs. There had been many, each one slightly different. The particular year's particular spring, the weather it brought, the things it required, but all of them spring, all of them the rice coming back, the field returning to what it was, the green of it, the smell of the wet earth, the long work of planting. That was the same work every year, done by the same people, or the people who came after, the same people. He stood in the field one spring morning. He looked at the mountain that was always there, above the valley, unchanged. He thought about the hollow, the cedar roots, the depression in the earth, whether it was still there, whether the cedar was larger, whether anything had stayed there after him, animals perhaps, or just the mountain being the mountain. He thought about the monk, where he had gone, whether he was still walking. He had thought about this many times. He still did not know. Probably never would. The monk had come and gone, the way the monk came and went, without needing to be known. Sato came to stand beside him. She did this sometimes, came to stand beside him, without reason, without needing a reason, just being there. They looked at the mountain together, the mist around its peaks, the particular blue of it in the morning. She said, "What do you think about when you look at it?" He said, "I think about the hollow, where I lived, whether it's still there." She said, "Do you want to go see?" He thought about this. He said, "No, I like thinking about it the way it was. If I went back, it would be different. I would see what it is now, and I would lose what I have, which is what it was." She said, "That's a strange way to love something." He said, "Is it?" She said, "Most people want to see the thing they love." He said, "I see it every morning, in the shape of the mountain. The hollow is in there somewhere, the cedar, the roots. I don't need to go to it. It's enough to know it's there." She said, "Like the mountain itself. You said you just like to know it's there." He said, "Yes, some things are better known than seen." The planting began, the long work of the spring, knee-deep in water, the same work he had done every spring since the first spring, the same field, the same water, different hands alongside him now, some the same, some new, the village changing as villages change, slowly, in ways you don't notice, until you look back and see how much has changed. He planted. His hands knew what to do. They had known for a long time the work that had been learned in the mud of the first spring and repeated until it was not something he thought about, but something his body did, while his mind was somewhere else. His mind was on the mountain, on the hollow, on the monk, on the other man walking west, on Sato standing at the field's edge, on the boy asking questions, on the word the monk had said, "The mountain is good for some things. It is not good for everything." He was in the field. He was planting. He was of here. The spring moved around him, the water, the green beginning, the mountain above. He planted. Part 12. The last cleaning. He knew in the autumn, not from anything specific, not from pain. The body did not announce it. The body had been slowing for years, in the way bodies slow, gradually, in ways you accommodate, without noticing you are accommodating. He knew the way you know, when something has run its full course, when the thing that has been happening has arrived at its completion, not an ending, a completion, the thing that was supposed to happen, having happened. He sat by the river that autumn morning, the mist, the water moving past, the particular quality of the light that belongs to late autumn, when the summer is entirely gone, and the winter has not yet declared itself, the space between. He thought, "This is the last autumn," and then he thought, "That's all right." He told Sato, not dramatically, not with ceremony. She was at the field. He went to where she was. He stood beside her. He said, "I think this winter will be the last one." She looked at him. She looked at him the way she looked at things. She was determining the truth of, the particular assessment. She said, "Are you sure?" He said, "No, I might be wrong, but I don't think I am." She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "All right." He said, "All right." She said, "Is there anything you need?" He thought about it. He said, "No, I have everything. I have had everything for a long time." She said, "Then we'll just continue until we don't." He said, "Yes." He continued. He did the work the autumn required, the harvest, the storing, the preparation for winter. He did it at his pace, which was slower than it had been. The village adjusted. The village had been adjusting to him for many years. The boy came to help him more. The boy who had grown, who was not a boy now, who asked fewer questions because he had learned enough to know what he did not know, and to hold that quietly rather than asking about it. He worked beside the man without talking. The silence that is its own companionship, the same silence the man had known with the other men who carried things a long time ago in another life. He cleaned the sword every day. This had not changed. This would be the last thing to change, if anything was going to change. He cleaned it in the mornings, the winter mornings, when the cold was in the room, and the fire was low, and the village was quiet, in the way of a village. In the deep of winter, he cleaned it slowly, with the attention he had always given it. Each part, the blade, the guard, the handle, the cord that had held, when everything else had let go. In the water at Danura, the cord that had held all these years. He said to it, "We've been together a long time." The sword said nothing. The fire was low. The morning was quiet. He said, "I still don't have a name for you. I still don't have one for myself. I think that's all right. I think we were always going to be the nameless ones, in the nameless places, doing the nameless things that needed doing." Sato sat with him some mornings. Not every morning, but some. She brought tea. She sat. She did not always talk. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she just sat. One morning she said, "Tell me about the mountain. All of it. From the beginning." He said, "You know most of it." She said, "I know what you've told me over the years. In pieces. I want to know it all at once. From the beginning. From Danura." He looked at her. She was looking at the sword. Then she looked at him. The assessment, the particular attention. He said, "Why?" She said, "Because I want to know it. All of it. Before I can't ask any more." He told her, from the beginning, the ship, the battle, the things he had seen that he had decided not to think about and had not spoken of in many years. He spoke of them now, quietly, without the weight they had carried. In the first years, they had become lighter, not smaller, just easier to hold. He told her about the shore, about the rocks, about the 3 days, the hollow, the sounds that came at night, the deer, the sword, talking to the sword. He told her about the monk, the monk sitting on the root and waiting. The 3 days. What the monk said about names. What the monk said about the mountain. He told her about arriving at the village. The mist. Her mother at the edge of the field. Can you plant rice? The mud. The slowness of learning. He told her, about watching her ask questions, about the feathers she had brought, about sitting at the river, about everything. Sato listened. She did not interrupt. She held her tea. She listened the way he had learned to listen, fully, without waiting for her turn to speak, just receiving what was given. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "It's a good story." He said, "It's not a story, it happened." She said, "That's what makes it a good one." He said nothing. He looked at the sword. She looked at the sword. She said, "I'll take care of it. After." He said, "I know." She said, "I'll clean it, the way you showed me without showing me." He said, "Yes." She said, "It still won't have a name." He said, "No, that's right. It never needed one. Neither did I. In the end, what I needed was here. What the sword needed was here. We were both here. That was enough." The winter continued. He planted no more springs. He saw the snow. He saw the mountain above the snow. He sat by the fire. He cleaned the sword. He was still here. For a while longer, he was still here. The sword beside him, nameless, as it had always been, the mountain above, always there, as it had always been, the village around him, warm, as it had been, since the morning he arrived, in the mist, and stood at the edge of the field, and said, "I was told you might need someone who knows how to do things." He had known how to do things. He had done them. He was still doing them, or the last of them, the last thing a person does, which is to be present, until they are not. He was present. The sword was beside him. Sato was nearby. The boy who was no longer a boy was nearby. The village was around him. The mountain was above. The river was moving. At the edge of the valley, moving as it always moved. Never the same water twice. He breathed. The fire was warm. The winter was quiet. He breathed. Part 13. Sato's story. He came in the mist. Sato remembered this. Not because she had seen him arrive. She had been inside. But she remembered the mist that morning. The particular quality of it. The way it sat in the valley. And turned the rice field gray. And made the mountain invisible above. Her mother had gone out. Sato had watched from the doorway. She had seen the figure at the edge of the field. She had seen her mother walk to him. She had not heard what they said. She had seen her mother turn back toward the house. The particular walk of her mother when something had been decided, not hesitant, decided. She had known then that the figure would stay. Her mother did not invite people who were not going to stay. She had watched him for a long time before she spoke to him. This was her nature. Watch first. Understand what you are watching. then speak. Her mother had been the same. Her mother had watched everything, had understood everything, had spoken only when speaking added something to what the watching had already given her. The man was worth watching. He was different from the village people, not in a way that was dangerous, in a way that was interesting. He had come from somewhere. He carried it with him, not the way people carry things that make them difficult, the way people carry things that have made them exactly what they are. She had understood this before she could name it. She was young when he arrived, but she had her mother's eyes. She saw things. She brought him the feather. She thought about this sometimes, why she had brought him the feather. She had found it by the river, a large feather, beautiful. She had thought of him immediately, without knowing why. She had brought it to him. He had looked at it. He had said thank you. He had kept it. She had not brought him things because she wanted something. She had brought him things because bringing things was a way of saying, I see you. I think about you. You are not invisible to me. She did not know if he understood this. She thought he did. He was good at understanding things that were not said directly, better than most people, better even than her mother, who was very good at it. She had been afraid sometimes, not of him, for him, the rider who came in the 4th year. She had stood at the edge of the field and watched the rider stop in front of the man, and she had been afraid, in the particular way, of someone who has something to lose, and can see the possibility of losing it, clearly and directly. She had not shown it. She had her mother's face for these moments, the face that showed nothing, because showing nothing was what the situation required. When the rider left, she had gone to him. She had said, "Are you all right?" She had given him the cloth for his feet. She had wanted to say more. She had not said more. The situation had not required more. He was all right. The rider was gone. More words would have been for her benefit, not his, so she had not said them. She had asked him his name. She had wanted to know for a long time. She had waited until it was the right time, until the asking would not feel like a demand, until they had accumulated enough between them that the question was not an intrusion, but a natural thing. The next thing. He had said it. She had said it back, testing the sound. It was a name. It was his name, but it was not what she called him. What she called him was what he had become, what the village called him, what had accumulated. She understood what he meant when he said the name belonged to before. She had not had a before. In the same way, she had been born here, she had grown here, she was of here, in the most complete sense. She could not imagine being of somewhere else, but she had seen it in him. The before, the way it sat in him, not heavily, not painfully, just present, the before and the now, coexisting, as they always do, in people who have lived more than one kind of life. She had not left. She had thought about it. She had told him she thought about it. She had wanted to be honest with him. the way he was honest with her, the particular honesty of people who have decided that not saying things is a kind of waste. But she had not left. She knew she would not leave. She was her mother's daughter. Her mother had stayed through the war, through the husband who did not come back, through the years, through everything. Her mother had stayed. Staying was in her, the way planting rice was in her, the way watching was in her. She had not chosen it. It had accumulated, like everything that matters. When he told her it was the last winter, she had believed him immediately. She had not wanted to, but she believed him. He knew things about himself, the way he knew things about the mountain, not because he had studied them, because he had been paying attention for a very long time. She had said, "All right," because there was nothing else to say, because he had not told her, so that she could argue with it. He had told her, so that she would know, so that she could prepare, so that the knowing would be part of what happened, rather than something that arrived without warning. He was like that. He prepared people quietly, without making it a bigger thing than it needed to be. She had asked him to tell her everything: the last winter, the cold mornings, the fire low. She had sat with him and asked him to tell her from the beginning. He had told her all of it, the things she had known in pieces, and the things she had not known, the things he had not told anyone, or had told only the sword. She had listened. She was good at listening. Her mother had taught her. By doing it, you listen the way you plant rice, with your whole body, with your attention entirely on the thing, not waiting for your turn, just receiving. She had received everything he told her. She held it. She would hold it for the rest of her life. The sea, the mountain, the monk, the village, the writer, the other man, all of it. When he finished, she had said, "It's a good story." He had said, "It's not a story. It happened." She had said, "That's what makes it a good one." She had meant this. The best stories are the ones that happened, not because they are more dramatic, because they are more true, and truth is the thing that stays when everything else fades. After he was gone, she cleaned the sword. She had watched him clean it so many times that her hands knew what to do. This was how he had taught her, not by teaching, by doing, year after year, until the doing was in her, the way the staying was in her. She cleaned it carefully, each part, the blade, the guard, the handle, the cord that had held when everything else had let go. She did not talk to it. She was not him. She did not have his relationship with it. She had her own relationship with it, the relationship of someone who understands what something meant to someone else, and who honors that meaning by caring for the thing that held it. She kept it for a long time. It sat in the corner of the room where he had died. She cleaned it regularly, not every day, but regularly, the way he had shown her, without showing her. The village people sometimes asked about it, the ones who had known him. She told them what she knew, which was most of it now. The sea, the mountain, the monk, the things he had carried, and the things he had put down, and the things he had never put down. The sword was one of the things he had never put down, even when he put down everything else. Even when the armor was gone, and the roll was gone, and the clan was gone, the sword remained, nameless, beside him. She understood this now, in a way she had not understood when he was alive. The sword was not a weapon to him. It was the witness, the one that had been there from the beginning, from the water at Danura to the last winter morning. She was the witness now, for both of them, for the man and the sword. She held what they had been, in the holding, in the cleaning, in the telling of the story, when people asked. The boy who had grown came to her once. He had his own children now. The village changed. He was part of the change. He came to her and said, "Tell me about him, the whole thing. I want to tell my children." Sato looked at him, the boy who had asked, about the ship, about the ocean, about the sword without a name, now a man with children, who wanted to know. She said, "Sit down, it's a long story." He sat down. She told him, from the beginning, the sea, the mountain, the monk, the village, the rider, the other man, the river, the last winter, all of it. The boy who was a man listened, the way he had always listened, with all of his attention, the attention he had learned from watching the man who had come from the mountain. When she finished, he said, "I'll tell my children." She said, "Good. Tell them all of it. Don't leave out the parts that don't seem important. Those are usually the most important parts." He said, "Which parts are those?" She thought about it. She said, "The deer, the feather, the way he talked to the sword, the way he looked at the mountain, the ordinary parts, the parts that were just him, being him, in the ordinary days. Those are the ones worth keeping." Part 14. After. The village continued. This is what villages do. They continue. The people in them change. The people who were there are replaced by the people those people made. And then those people are replaced. And then those people. The rice field continued. The mountain continued. The river continued. The shrine at the edge of the field was repaired when it needed repairing, and stood when it did not. Sato continued for many years. She ran the village the way her mother had run it, the way that is not running, but is simply being the person who knows what needs doing. She told the story to the people who asked, to the boy who had grown, to his children, to the people who came after. The story changed slightly each time it was told. This is what stories do. They change in the telling, not because people lie, because each telling is filtered through the person telling it, what they remember, what they understand, what they want to pass on, but the core of it stayed. The sea, the mountain, the nameless sword, the man who came down, and stayed, who planted rice, who fixed a roof, who was of here. The sword passed from hand to hand. Sato kept it for a long time. Then it passed to the boy who had grown. He kept it. His children's children kept it. For generations, at some point the keeping became the not keeping. The way things go, from kept to lost, without a single moment of decision. Just the accumulation of time and change, and the people who knew why it mattered, not being there anymore. To say why it mattered, the sword was gone, somewhere, into the world, doing what things do when they are no longer held by the people who understood them, becoming something else, or nothing, or still a sword somewhere, still nameless, still doing what swords do when they are simply present. The mountain is still there. This is the part that does not change. The mountain above the valley. The same mountain he looked at every morning. The same mountain the monk came from. The same mountain that held the hollow and the cedar and the space where a man lived for 2 winters and then came down. The mountain does not know this. Mountains do not know things. They simply are. They are present in the particular way of things that have been present for longer than anyone can remember and will continue to be present after everyone has stopped remembering. The hollow is still there. The cedar is larger. The hollow is smaller. The particular shape of roots around earth that made a space just right for a man to sit with his back against the roots and the slope of the hill behind him. Nothing lives there now, or animals live there, the animals of the mountain who find the spaces that fit them. The hollow fits something. It always has. It will fit something for as long as the cedar holds. The rice field is still there. Different hands plant it now. Different hands have planted it for many generations. The field does not know who plants it. The field requires only the planting, the attention, the patience, the willingness to stand in cold water and do the same thing repeatedly until the thing is done. He had been good at this. He had been good at most things that required patience. The mountain had given him patience, or he had always had it, and the mountain had made him aware of it. Either way, the field continues as fields continue, because they are needed, because people eat rice, because the valley is the right shape for a rice field, and the mountain provides the water, and the river carries what the field does not need. It continues because it continues. This is the only reason. Most things continue. Somewhere, once, a monk walked through these mountains. He sat on a root. He waited. He ate food that was offered. He stayed 3 days. He said, "There is a village 3 days east. They need people who know how to do things." Then he left. Where he went after that, no one knows. Whether he found his own place or continued walking his whole life, whether the walking was his place, he understood something about the difference between the mountain and the valley. The mountain is good for some things. It is not good for everything. He had said this to one person. That person had acted on it. The acting had resulted in a life. A long life, a quiet life, a life of rice and roof fixing, and talking to a sword, and watching a girl grow into a woman who ran a village. The monk did not know this happened. He had moved on, but it happened. His 3 days on that mountain became someone's whole life. This is what small acts do. When they land in the right place, they become larger than themselves, without anyone intending it, without anyone knowing. The story was told for many generations, in the village, by the rice field, in the winter evenings, when the work was done, and the fire was warm, and there was time for the things that are not work, but that are necessary. The story changed, a little more each telling. The man became taller in some versions. The sword became famous in some versions. The battle became bigger. The monk became a famous monk in some versions. But in every version, the man came from the mountain. He planted rice. He fixed a roof. He stayed. The sword had no name. Neither did he. Not really. Not anymore. This part stayed. The namelessness stayed, because it was the truest part, and truth stays, longer than the details around it. What he had been, a man who carried things, for a clan that no longer existed, on a ship that no longer existed, in a war that was finished, a man who swam to shore, who walked 3 days, who found a hollow, who talked to a sword, a man who came down from the mountain when a monk told him to, who stood at the edge of a rice field in the morning mist and said, "I was told you might need someone who knows how to do things, a man who learned to plant rice, who fixed a roof, who stayed through winter after winter, who became of here, not from here, of here, a man who talked to a girl, who asked questions, who watched her become a woman, who asked better questions, who sat by a river with her and said things that neither of them could have said to anyone else, a man who cleaned a sword every morning of his life after Danura, because the cleaning was the continuity, the one thread that ran from who he had been to who he became, a man who died quietly, in winter, in a warm room, with the people who had become his, nearby, with the sword beside him. The sword, no name, no famous battles, no famous smith, no lineage, just a sword that did what swords do, and stayed. When everything else was changing, it had been in the water at Danura, it had been on the mountain, it had been cleaned every morning for many years, it had been held by a boy who wanted to know what it felt like. It had been passed from hand to hand, and then it was gone. But it had been all of those things, in all of those places, with all of those people, nameless, as the man was nameless, as the story is nameless. The spring comes, every year, to the valley, to the rice field, to the mountain above. The planting begins, the green begins, the water in the field, reflects the sky and the mountain and the particular light of a spring morning in a valley between mountains. Someone stands in the field planting, as someone has stood in this field planting for longer than anyone remembers. The mountain is above. The river is at the edge of the valley. The shrine stands at the edge of the field. The mist is in the valley. The mist that was there when he arrived. The mist that turns the field gray and makes the mountain invisible above. The mist clears. It always clears. By mid-morning, the mountain appears, as it always appears, as it always will appear. The man in the field plants. He does not know the story, or he knows pieces of it, the version that has been told so many times that the details have softened into something like legend. He plants. His hands know what to do. The field requires only the planting. He plants. The mountain is there. The river is moving. The spring is here. Somewhere in the mountain, a hollow holds the memory of a man who was there, who cleaned a sword, who talked to it, who came down when he was ready. The mountain does not know this. The field does not know this. The river does not know this. But it happened. All of it happened. For exactly as long as it happened. And then it became the kind of thing that happened. The kind that leaves a shape in the places it passed through. He swam to shore. He walked 3 days. He stayed. The mountain is still there. The river is still moving. The spring is here. It is enough. It is more than enough. It is exactly as much as there was.